Hello and welcome to a very special episode of NRI Affairs. I'm with Carlo Carli, who is the chairperson of the Federation of Ethnic Communities Council of Australia. Thank you for being on our
Thank you
show.
so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. So we'll jump right into it. Of course, we represent the Indian diaspora in Australia. And I wanted to ask you what pathways exist for new emerging leaders from the community to engage in positions of decision making, to get into councils, to get into positions where they actually can impact the community.
Well, I mean, in Australia, when people participate in the political system, I mean, local government's always been a really critical, if you like, vehicle for people to learn how the system works and to get an understanding. It's a very important area of service provision and for communities and for building the sense of community. So I would say that local government is really, a first vehicle. And I mean, I know that there are numerous Indian people who are contesting the current elections in Victoria,
Yes.
and I think no doubt a number of them will be elected. It takes time for a community to learn how a political system operates. Can I say that I'm now old enough to know when there was incredible resistance to people that came from a non-British, non-Irish background.
Sure.
Now people say, oh yes, well, politics is run by, you know, Italians and Greeks and all, which is sort of true. It's sort of true. Someone was remarking the other day how many people with Italian surnames are leaders of parties in different states. So clearly it has changed, and I think those communities really broke, if you like, the barrier.
Sure.
So as communities get a bit more settled and people feel comfortable, the reality though is a lot of people seek, first of all, to have economic stability. And public life at any level is a lot of sacrifice for not that much reward. So people are very, very keen to say, oh yes, but you know, politicians get paid a lot. Only some, only some. A lot of public life is commitment, and
Yes.
the rewards are there, but they're probably not financial. And often when people arrive in Australia, the first priority is to make money, get a house, send the kids to school, and
Sure.
that in itself is somewhat of a barrier to people's participation because it takes up so much time. But I think you know, we will see with the council elections how many people from the Indian diaspora enter local government. But I would say numerous.
Sure.
I was in the state parliament, and there were a number of people from Sri Lankan background, so
Yes.
who have gone through, and that was a community that got involved probably very early on. For a number of reasons. One was because there were a lot of them were burghers, they knew, so they were people of part European, part Sri Lankan background, who got very heavily involved, particularly in the trade union movement, and that's
Sure.
where they entered. And that was true, and they became very significant in Australian politics, particularly Victorian politics. So so there are groups that have sort of pushed ahead, if you like, quicker than others.
Right. And also, apart from just the political system, what about organizations such as FECCA and ECCQ for young people to actually find an opportunity there?
Yeah, I think that's a really good one. I think if the communities suffer a little bit from older men like myself taking too much responsibility, I'm a believer that, you know, once you get to a certain age and experience, your job is to mentor and is to provide
Sure.
opportunities for others. And this conference that FECCA is organising, we have a lot of commitment to young people, to speak, to be heard, to be seen, to take responsibility. And I think that is a really deliberate way of people to operate. Because the problem is that people say, oh yes, well, we like young people, they just have to be like us.
Yeah.
Well, that's
they're not
never
like
going to
us.
happen. Right? They're never going to be like
Yes.
us. You have to give people space and opportunities, and I think we probably do it pretty badly. And I think we have to improve, because I think the future of multiculturalism, the future of this country, in broadly speaking, but the political future is now dependent on young people. and they do not think like I do. I mean, I know this from having children. They don't think like I do. They're not committed to the political parties as they used to be, and that's great. That's different. It's another way.
Yes.
And they will push forward, and they will make a change. And we have to allow the space for that to happen. And I think ethnic communities often don't do it particularly well. They tend to, people tend to want to be leaders and take opportunities and to be important.
Yes.
That's great. You've got to give young people a go, and you've got to recognise that they'll be different. They will not be you. You do not reproduce yourself.
No, this is an important sort of point that leads into my next question, which is even within diasporic communities, there is a lot of diversity, right, within. So if you're thinking about Indian communities or Hindu communities, and I also represent Hindus for Human Rights,
Yes.
which is an advocacy and grassroots engagement organization. And we represent a far more pluralistic and inclusive, maybe version of what is normally seen in spaces that represent Indians or Hindus.
Yes.
And what is the way then for organizations such as ours, which are very little but we think have important things to say, and if the representation is for the largest organization that covers the largest number of people, perhaps more important voices get left out?
Yep.
So
Right.
how do we bridge that gap?
I think you'll always find that communities are much more complex than people make out, and governmental people are often very good at saying, "Oh, yes, we want to talk to Indian community or the Italian community
Yes.
or whoever," where they may actually be talking to one fractional
Yes.
fragment, and the divisions might be political, religious, ethnic,
Ideology.
ideological. They could be quite complex, and also what Australian decision makers often don't recognise is that changes in community relationships can often relate to changes that are occurring in the country of origin.
Yes. That's very true.
The Italians probably know this more than anyone else because we had a large Italian population in Australia before and during the Second World War, and it was divided politically and ideologically. There were people who supported
Sure.
fascism, and there were fervent anti-fascists. And when the government of the day said we want to put Italians into concentration camps because we don't trust them, even Italians that had their children in the Australian army,
Wow.
they still got put into camps. They put the fascists and the anti-fascists together. And guess what happened?
They got along.
They got along. No, they did not get along. They fought, and there were even deaths.
Of
Right.
course, of course.
So one of the things we have to make the authority, and this is in the 1940s. So because they said, oh yes, well they're Italian, they're subversive. Let's put them away. And without considering the fact that politically
they're so different.
they're so divided.
Yes.
They were so divided. And I think that is a lesson for all of us, that you
Yes.
can't assume the groups are coherent or uniform or cohesive or homogenous.
Yes.
The Indian diaspora is so large
Yes.
and it's so diverse that clearly there will be divisions, and it really is trying to understand that. It's a bit. I heard another story about when I was a member of Parliament once, and I had a group of a particular sect of Islam that don't actually believe in Ramadan or mosque, right? So they're out there, and they got a letter from the Premier to congratulate them for their Ramadan celebration.
They said, well.
And they came to me and they said, doesn't he know anything? I said, no, he does not. And I will make sure, so,
Yes.
so even those differences aren't really well understood.
Yes.
And that's understandable. And in a multicultural society, we have to constantly remind people of what the differences are. We have to be aware of the challenges that come from another country. I had a very good friend who a person I worked with, who was from Kashmir during the Kashmir crisis.
Yes.
She was devastated. She, you know, her whole
Yes.
worldview had changed. She didn't know what was. There was a period where there was no communication. So she didn't know what was happening with her family. Now, those are traumas that occur from somewhere else,
Yes.
and we know it now because we have now so many conflicts in the world
Yes.
that are creating real tensions. And we as a society have to learn that to understand that there has to be a diversity of ideas and tolerance, and we need to give people the space to be able to express themselves within a context where they don't go overboard, like we don't go to
Yes.
extremes. But we can't shut it out. We can't pretend that people won't be affected by what's happening in the world.
Absolutely, and and this is a conversation we've just been having outside, that, you know, everybody's not coming to the table with the same level of emotional involvement or skin in the game, right? So when someone's coming, say from Gaza, and coming with huge trauma and rage and anger, is there space then to hear them and meet them where they are, and not expect them to participate in a civil discourse with the same dispassion that someone else is able to?
And I think you have to invest in those things that will build a sense of trust and a sense of belonging. I think
Yes.
that they're really the key ones. The other thing that is always a threat to a society like us is anything that will create social exclusion,
Yes.
anything that creates marginalised groups. We cannot, as a society, afford to marginalise people. And that could be economic marginalisation, or that could be, you know, if you like, political, social, cultural
Sure.
marginalisation. So you cannot say to a person, you know, you are from Gaza, therefore you are a threat, or you are from somewhere else, you are a threat.
That's horrific, yes, of course.
And so my view about all of that is these are things that government and communities need to invest in. I tell people I do this all the time because I run a soccer club. I'm a president of a soccer club with 700 players. We have people from all over the world, people who would otherwise not be cooperating and working together. I'm not saying that's the only one, but
sport can be one.
Those
yes.
institutions in the society
Yes.
that allow people to share and to nurture trust, they have to be supported, because otherwise we risk as a society to exclude people. And once you exclude people, you are in a very, very difficult situation. And that exclusion could be cultural, social, it could be also economic.
Yes, no, absolutely. And again, that, you know, that really speaks a lot to something Deepak and I have been speaking about as well, that, you know, it's a wonderful conference. There's great learning that's bound to come. But there's a cost to be here, right? Which is hundreds of dollars,
Yes.
perhaps even thousands. Now, we are talking about community, we're talking about people, we're talking about issues of people who are not here.
Yes.
And is there a way then that an organization like FECCA, or even from the government, that we think about how the learnings and the conversations that happen here can actually go into communities, for instance, town halls or community centers, where they could actually, people could gather and watch the proceedings for free,
Yes.
and participate and ask questions and be involved.
Yep.
What is your view on that?
My view is if it could be free, I would love to do it.
Let's do it.
I mean, the problem is a resource
Yes.
issue. I mean, we have used as much of the resources that we could gather to allow for people to come for very small costs. So there is a proportion of the, let's say 700 delegates, there's a proportion, and it might not be huge, but there is money that we've allocated to young people and to some people who we knew should be here, who have a voice.
Sure.
But it's very small because at the end of
Yes.
the day we have to pay the bills, you know.
Yes.
And that is the problem. My view would be the more we could do, I mean, I really think the response is place-based. It's you work in areas where you've got people living close to each other, and because you have to build that sense of trust and belonging. And I think that there needs to be a lot more. And I don't think it's really featured in a lot of government strategies. I think you know, government tends to. I mean, we've gone through a period where governments tend to say, well, how many people have been involved? You know, let's tick off the numbers. Let's say, you know, have, they like
Yes, yes.
boxes and they like to
And they
tick
like
them.
data, which
They
doesn't
love
always
data.
tell you the
And
right
that's
story
right.
of community.
And-
So yeah,
And some communities are under enormous stress, and we need to recognise that, and they need to, and we need to be building that sense, what I would call social capital. We need to build a social capital. We need to create opportunities for people. And I've seen very good examples of it, but it's not central to get the government mission, and it should be.
yes,
So that the whatever local that works, that brings people together and builds trust. That is not to say that everyone should agree on everything. They should not have to agree on everything, but they should respect other people's views. And I mean, one of the problems we have with the Gaza dispute is that the Jewish community and the pro-Palestinian, particularly the Muslim communities, live on other sides of town. I mean, they literally do not live anywhere near each other. I mean, we should be playing soccer against each other because, or doing things together. Because in Melbourne, for example, you can go to the northern suburbs and every second shop has got a Palestinian flag and Free Palestine, and that's it. You can go to Caulfield Balaclava and it's the opposite.
and it's the opposite.
Now that is a real problem because spatially they don't
Yes,
mix.
yes.
They don't know, they don't know each other. How can you build trust with people that don't know or cooperate? And I have to give you a soccer story because it always finishes
Let's hear
in
it.
my soccer club. So we're in a city, so we have people from the refugees from the flats. We have, young families that are professionals. We have people from the university. Sometimes we have people that, teach at the university. So one year we're giving out awards to little kids, and this guy says, "I want to make a speech," and I said, "Oh no, not this again. These people that want to make speeches, they just drive me crazy." And he gets up and he makes a speech, and he does the most brilliant speech. And he says, "I am from Israel. I'm an Israeli academic," and he says, and I come from a country that we claim to be the most multicultural country in the world, and we do not mix. We do not mix. I come to this soccer club and my kids play with, Muslim kids and African kids and, children of, surgeons at the hospital, and, we're all here mixing and getting to know each other, and I love it. And I said, well, that is a great speech. But it does tell you something. It tells you that, if
Yes.
the more we can have people working together, the better. And the fact that we separate people, I mean, they're separated for, because of a whole lot of reasons, socioeconomic reasons, but they're highly separated. And
Yes.
and it just makes the situation so much worse.
Worse. No, I hear you. And one of those things, obviously, that conferences like this is actually bring people together.
Yes.
And we get to hear different points of view.
Yes.
And also we learn how to listen to things that we don't agree with in an agreeable fashion.
Yes.
And I would like to know specifically for, say, the Indian community that also addresses issues like caste discrimination
Yes.
now in Australia. How is the FECCA and other bodies such as FECCA engaging with this issue?
Well, and I'm not sure we engage so much with the caste issue as we are very engaged with the issue around human rights.
Yes,
And particularly, see, Australia is the only, if you like, one of the few nations on earth that has not codified the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or any of the other 6 major international conventions on human rights. So we sign off on them,
Right, but we haven't.
but they're not in law, right? There's no protection for them. And those to me, the human rights do directly tackle questions of caste and that sort and
Discrimination,
and discrimination. Now, there is now the Human Rights Commission together with FECCA are supporting are really pushing for governments to adopt human rights and human rights conventions as a broad,
Yes.
if you like, statement of intent that this is a country that does not accept that accepts a level of equality and human rights and the human rights the classic definition is my human rights end when your human rights start, right?
Yes.
We're not, human rights are not absolute, but it would actually I think it would deal with the questions like people trying to use, caste divisions to create divisions amongst the
lack
diaspora.
of equity,
Lack of equity. Yeah. The other thing I keep reminding myself is we use the term social cohesion a lot, and social cohesion is said to be, all these things about, all good things about people working together and, sense of place and self and all of that. But when you actually look at the literature for social cohesion, it also includes equity. It also includes the idea that you deal with inequalities.
Those are thornier things.
They
more
are
difficult
thornier things, and they are human rights too. The right to to housing is an economic right, and it just strikes me that Australia, the great Australia. I mean, people come to Australia because they want to be better off. They want their kids to be better off. They don't come to Australia to do it tough.
Yes.
And I think Australia's become more and tougher for a lot of our immigrants. And we've allowed a lot of people with less rights because we've allowed more and more people to come here with very temporary
that's a big
visas.
issue.
Oh, with the Indian population, it's huge.
It's a big issue.
It's huge.
The Home Affairs is doing this whole campaign around the protection visa and the misuse of the protection visa, and the fact that unscrupulous agents are using these things to lure communities into taking the wrong path, and then it leads to a very complicated visa situation.
And the use of education visas, student visas, and the limits of that. And also, from FECCA's perspective, we want most visas and hence most migration to Australia to have paths to permanency.
Right.
Not to be and
temporary.
what we've seen is, which was historically Australian migration. I mean, Australian migration was in fact all permanent. It didn't come to Australia on a temporary anything once. Now we've gone the other extreme. We've got so many temporary visas, many which are highly exploited and make people highly vulnerable. So people become almost indentured labour to one employer because in case that they lose their job, they have to go. So there's a lot of protections in that. Now, some of that has been, when we talk about the multicultural framework, the Shergold review of visas, that tries to deal with some of those issues. But again, it needs courage from politicians and political, and also we can't victimise people. I mean, this idea that somehow, at the moment, the idea that somehow our problems are caused by students. Like, oh my God, sorry.
Let's go back to the drawing board.
let's just give up. What do you mean? Our student population is now our problem. We haven't got housing because of students. We haven't got this. Sorry, they're a really critical labour force in this country, and we've allowed that to happen. And what I say is we need to protect people's rights, people's workers' rights. The Indian community is particularly vulnerable because people come here often with made
education visas
and made enormous family debts around that.
Yes.
And so they can't just go back. And we saw that with COVID when the government said, okay, we'll give everyone money except people on student visas, you have to go home. A lot of them could never go home. The borders were shut, they didn't have the money, they were committed to stay in Australia.
Terrible situation.
I remember we organised food kitchens for people, particularly Pakistani community, more so in our area, it was a Pakistani community.
Sure.
They were just left with nothing, and really what saved them in the end was Uber Eats, because Uber Eats employed them all. If it wasn't for Uber Eats, I don't know what would have happened to them. And that was complete negligence, I think, by government. I mean, what was your expectation? What do you expect those people to do?
Right. So not forward thinking enough. So finally, just to wrap up, you work closely with government, you work with community, you work with leaders. What is it that you hope FECCA can play a role in this new world that we are seeing, which is so fraught with conflict?
Well, as I said, I think we have to build around a framework of human rights. We have to create protections for people. We have to recognise that Australia's role is to provide opportunities. We do not want to be the United States. The United States has got 12 million illegal workers, who get virtually no payments and are just hanging on. No, we want to provide everyone with a decent. Well, first of all, we've got a medical system that Medicare. We need to provide Medicare. We need to provide schools. We need to provide for everyone. Like we need to be a land of opportunity, because at the end of the day, the wealth of this country is built on migration. And so so you have to invest in it. You can't just expect it to just happen. And I think that there's been, particularly with the student population, there's been too much of a belief that we have students because they bring money, rather than we have students who bring money. They provide a labour force.
And they contribute to this country.
They contribute a lot to this country, and a lot of them want to stay.
Yes.
And they come here with that expectation. I'm not sure we should not be making those paths clearer.
Thank you so much
No,
for this
pleasure.
conversation.
Pleasure. It's a long